tonight, Sangre Grande tomorrow night. It's a daily so, this is what I want you to know.
Sangre Grande is the largest town in East Trinidad, a place that is still relatively new compared to the rest of Trinidad and Tobago. Grande, as everyone in the area calls it, is the epicenter of economic development and transportation in East Trinidad. Many ask the question how Sangre Grande got its name, and locals from the area would amount to the town name meaning Spanish for big blood, and related to the nearby village Sangre Chiquito, which is Spanish for small blood. There are of two known origins for the name of Sangre Grande. The first one, popularized by historian Michael Anthony, was that Sangre Grande was named after its environment, in specific, its river. In the late 1770s, Spanish surveyors who were charting the islands for the purposes of creating a map found that the waters of the two tributaries of the nearby Oropouche River were red as blood due to the natural reddish soil found in East Trinidad. Hence, the area with the larger tributary was named Sangre Grande, meaning big blood, while the neighboring town of Sangre Chiquito was named small blood because of the smaller tributary. The second origin of the town's name is explored by Patricia Tony in her thesis on Sangre Grande, and came in relation with the aftermath of the 1699 Arena Massacre. Trinidad during this time was a colony under the Spanish crown. The indigenous people on the island comprised of Kalinagos, also known as Caribs, and a lesser amount of Tainos, also known as Arawak. Tony delved into the Arena Massacre, a retaliation which occurred in San Rafael in the district of Arima, where the indigenous people rose in revolt against the church. For years they were grossly overworked and ill-treated. Thus, on December 1st, 1699, they reacted by murdering the Capuchin fathers, desecrating the statues and ornaments of the church, and burning the entire mission to the ground. In fear of their punishments for retaliation, the indigenous people band together in guerrilla warfare against the Spaniards. The governor and his entourage, who were expected to make an official visit to the mission, all but one of the governor's party died in their ambush. While the governor died from an arrow wound 3 days later, the indigenous people, realizing the escalated situation, fled to the seacoast in anticipation of the Spaniards. The massacre was soon made known, and the religious sector, the government, and its people in the colony sent armed forces to capture and punish the indigenous people for their retaliation. The Spaniards, with their horses and their advanced hunting skills, eventually caught up to the trail of the fleeing indigenous people in the area that would soon to be known as Sangre Grande. The indigenous people, in defense, lodged a strong resistance with their arrows, but the Spaniards, with their advanced weapons, soon killed and wounded the majority of them. It was said that so much blood was shed that the name Sangre Grande was the only appropriate name that could describe the scene, big blood. The Spaniards then hunted the remaining indigenous people to what is now known as Sangre Chiquito, where little blood was shed. Thus, the name Sangre Chiquito meaning little blood. The town of Sangre Grande did not exist until the late 1850s. Little is known about any development until the late 19th century. The Sesosing 2010 road, the district in which the town of Sangre Grande was situated, the ward of Ture, was created as an administrative district under the ward and counties system in the 1850s. Prior to that, the only settlement of the area occurred temporarily in the 1830s when Vincent Fafan lived in self-imposed exile at a small clearing of flatlands, also known as Vegas of the North Oropouche River, with his family. During that period, Sangre Grande was totally underdeveloped. It had the appearance of a wild, unclaimed, densely wooden village, with a few sparse settlements occupied by some of the indigenous population who had managed to escape the bloody encounter with the Spaniards. Patricia Tony stated that the town began up the hill at Upper Sangre Grande, a place known to many as Boys Town and Bravo Hill. It was there that all the commercial and administrative activities were transacted. The nearby settlement of Manzanilla and Valencia grew in importance, while the newly formed Sangre Grande continued to struggle due to it being difficult to access because of the terrible state of its road, impassable muddy terrain during the rainy season, and the many waterways that were bridgeless. John Morton, a pioneer of early education in Trinidad, recorded his account of his visit to Sangre Grande on September 13, 1891. He recalled, "I visit Sangre Grande. This is a place 24 miles inland from Tunapuna and 32 miles from Port of Spain. I traveled 8 miles to Arima by rail and the rest of the way in a very light, uncovered two-wheeler. On the first 7 miles, I crossed 5 different rivers. Up to that time, the road was good and the scenery was interesting. After that, for some miles, the soil is sandy, in places a dead straight level, reminding me of the sandy plains of Canada. The issue of accessibility to Sangre Grande soon changed with the rise of cocoa in Trinidad in the late 18th century, as investors such as baristas, businessmen, government officials, and foreigners looked towards the east in a scramble to buy and acquire its vast amount of forested crown land to clear for estates and agricultural production. There was a mad rush to stake claim, and several large cocoa estates came into being, the largest of which was Nonpareil. Hundreds of laborers poured into the area, from French Creoles and peasants to indented Indian and seasonal cocoa peons from Venezuela. They came to these newly opened crown land to develop its virgin soil with cocoa and other cash crops in exchange to be paid by the previously mentioned investors. One such of these influential investors was Robert Stewart Orchard Warner. Anthony stated, "Men of substance and influence in Port of Spain, like Warner, a barrister and former Attorney General, turned their faces to the east, and Warner himself profited from being the son-in-law of then Governor of Trinidad, Sir William Robinson, bought up a great deal of land in the Sangre Grande Manzanilla area and introduced cocoa. Warner, in fact, greatly influenced the settlement of Cunapo by getting the Trinidad Government Railway in 1896 to extend its line to Gunapo and further extend it in 1897 to the district of Cunapo. The train line passed close to a river and settlement called Sangre Grande, and so the authorities erroneously named the station Sangre Grande. Because of the railway station, the little village of Cunapo grew into a thriving district, but it was interesting that the newcomers never called it Cunapo, but by the name on its railway station, Sangre Grande, but not those who had lived in the district for generations. These people and their descendants called the area Cunapo, a name of Carib origin meaning red mangroves. The people who settled in Sangre Grande became quite active in the production of Trinitario cocoa, since the area was highly fertile for its cultivation. Because of its high rainfall, together with its warm and moist atmosphere, Sangre Grande was ideal for cocoa cultivation. Young cocoa plants required adequate shade from the time of planting, and Sangre Grande was able to afford the shade because of the tall immortal trees in the area and its windbreak. Cocoa was grown on a large scale and was one of the chief sources of income for the settlers in the district. Extensive cocoa plantations were found throughout Sangre Grande in the early 20th century, and estates such as the Brooks or the Monte Cristos occupied at least 100 acres and were cultivated chiefly for export purposes. The period 1870 to 1922 marked a golden epoch in Sangre Grande, as well as in Trinidad in relation to the cocoa industry, a time when cocoa was known as the golden bean. Sugarcane was cultivated south of the Eastern Main Road and at Supram Village. The introduction of the railway in Sangre Grande in 1897 coincided with the beginning of the development and the movement of the town from Upper Sangre Grande to Cunapo. When the railway was extended from Arima to Sangre Grande, there was an influx of persons into the area. Businessmen and proprietors were then finding it profitable to reside in Sangre Grande, since their produce could be easily transported by rail to Port of Spain. Therefore, the railway represented the most important factor in the development of Sangre Grande, since it had succeeded in encouraging persons with capital management and skill to settle in the area. Another important factor for the movement of the town from Upper Sangre Grande to Cunapo was the strategic position of Cunapo. Sangre Grande was more centrally located to serve the people of the neighboring district. To get to Upper Sangre Grande, one had to climb a hill. With the limited and very primitive means of transport in those early days, in fact, the only available mode of transport was the horse and donkey carts. The roads were covered with coconut shells with huge mud holes. Tired of climbing the strenuous hill, the vendors began to meet at Sangre Grande railway station, which was located in Cunapo, to either sell their agricultural products or to have their produce transported from the railway station. Thus, Cunapo became the new Sangre Grande and served as the central point for the surrounding district, and thereafter became the town center. Sangre Grande was also able to develop, for it was through Cunapo that the wardens and other officials had to travel to reach the offices and homes at Upper Sangre Grande. As Sangre Grande was becoming more and more important, the official buildings once situated at Upper Sangre Grande was transferred to Cunapo. New offices began to be constructed in Cunapo instead of Upper Sangre Grande. In 1912, the police station was built near the roundabout, the heart of the town. The warden's office was transferred to Toko Road in 1909, and in 1953, the Sangre Grande Hospital was built. Prior to 1953, the sick visited the Coronation Hospital at Upper Sangre Grande. Cocoa began to decline. In Trinidad, after the Great Depression of 1920, the international competition from African cocoa and the dreaded witch's broom disease, Grande, which was practically covered in cocoa, began to decline as a result. An alternative crop had to be cultivated if farmers wished to survive in Sangre Grande, of which they opt for citrus. And citrus first became important in the 1930s. Many trees were planted in badly stricken cocoa areas. Oranges and grapefruits formed the bulk of output from the citrus estate. In Sangre Grande, the Saint Marie estate was cited as one of the largest citrus producing estates. Several housing schemes began to develop around the town. Monte Cristo, was previously a huge cocoa estate, was developed as one of the first residential areas between 1942 and 1945. Another residential area that was established along the Eastern Main Road was named Brooklyn. The name Brooklyn was used because Mr. Brooks, who had previously owned that area. Also, the Sukram area, which was previously only a lagoon, became highly residential. Land from Nonpareil Estate was also leased to local investors. Housing lots during the early 20th century were sold for as little as $25 per lot. In view of these facts, it was seen as the emergence of Sangre Grande as a town. As more and more people realized that Sangre Grande was becoming a small town, they flocked to the area where they bought land and set up hardware stores, groceries, and clothing stores. Newer villages also formed as a result of the end of indentureship and the movement of former enslaved Africans. In the 1890s, the population, both Creole and Indian, followed the cocoa pioneers. It was a move away from the estate and continuous villages to a newly cleared forest and savanna land to grow both cocoa and rice. For example, in 1891 and 1901, an increase of 39% in the fast-growing ward union of Sangre Grande, which was being rapidly opened up for cocoa and other cultivation, as many settled near riverbanks and streams to plant.